Well, it took over 3,000 years, but somebody finally came knocking. I'm referring, of course, to November 26, 1922, when the legendary British explorer and archaeologist found the tomb of King Tut and made him into one of the most famous pharaohs in non-Egyptian history. It's a tribute to the spirit of the Victorians, but also a touching memento of the fragility and mystery of human life. Carter himself was one of these larger-than-life characters. He'd already found 2 tombs in the Valley of Kings, which people thought had been thoroughly plundered centuries earlier, including that of Queen Hatshepsut, whose funerary temple, by the way, is one of the most remarkable buildings in the history of human architecture. But that's a subject for another day. The point here is that Carter managed to find the tomb of King Tut when nobody else believed that it was out there. And I say he made Tut into one of the most famous pharaohs in non-Egyptian history because the fact is that in Egyptian history, Tut was something of a nobody. He's the son of Akhenaten, and he was originally Tutankhaten, but he decided to reverse his father's bizarre insistence on trying to turn Egypt into a monotheistic place worshipping Aten, and after he died, other dynasties decided that both he and his father really stank, and they decided to bury all evidence of them, destroy the records, including where the tomb was. Am I boring you with all this? Well, stay with me for a second here, because the thing that strikes me about Egypt is precisely that, although it is so well preserved in some sense, I mean, you enter the tomb of King Tut and it's just the way they left it when they buried the kid 3,000 plus years earlier. It's also fresh and vivid, and yet it's so entirely vanished. We still know about the gods of Greece and Rome, and someone can write a book saying men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and we all immediately know what he's talking about. But if you said, men are from Osiris or women are from Ptah, nobody would even stand up and say, wait a minute, wasn't Ptah a man? I don't know, he probably had one of those weird animal heads. I have no idea. You have to Google it to find out. So there is all this stuff. And one of the reasons Tut's so famous is not that his burial was that much more lavish, it's that the tomb raiders never did find his burial place, partly because it was covered in chips from the tomb of Ramses VI, which were just dumped there by people who didn't even know where Tut was. That's how obscure he'd become. But because the treasures were intact, we think this is true magnificence. There were other pharaohs who were far greater, and yet who are as vanished as their religious beliefs, their political aspirations, and anything else. So yeah, I admire people like Carter who went out and found the treasures of other civilizations that they either wouldn't have found or would have let fall to bits if they had found them, and preserved them. The West is like that, and let's not forget it. But I'm also just struck by this eerie fragility and weirdness of the mystery of human existence, all Tut's aspirations so perfectly preserved and yet so totally vanished. And they remind us not to seek salvation in earthly glory, but to remember that the things that matter most are not gold masks that are to be dug up 3,000 years later by somebody who goes, oh, this is weird, who was that guy anyway? And there's never a satisfactory answer. So yes, King Tut is very famous, not for having been a good pharaoh, not for having been thought a good pharaoh, not for the contents of his beliefs, but for the weird way in which those fragile, vanished aspirations still hovered in midair because the tomb was untouched more than 3,000 years later. It's a bit of a memento mori, and it makes us all stop and think, what shall become of our aspirations in future centuries? And how shall we be worthy to be remembered, whether we are in fact remembered by accident, deliberately, or not at all?